Welcome, everybody, in to Week 10 recap for the Brickyard podcast. We'll be breaking down every game that went down in Week 10 of the NFL. We'll go over all the latest news, signings, and to top off the end of the show, we'll go over the worst top fives going into Week 11. You're not going to want to miss it. Make sure you tune in, hit that like button, and follow everywhere you possibly can. Recap, Week 10. What a fucking week this was, huh?
No, this week was absolutely crazy. I mean, November is when football starts to get real, and Thursday night it got real, and we're finding out what teams are going to be there at the end and what teams may not end up making the playoffs because they decide to lose to teams like the Patriots in September here. But my God, story of the week, potentially the game of the year again. Possibly the two best games played by the two same teams against each other with the Ravens and the Bengals. Another shootout where Bengals get up and then the Ravens just find a way to come back. And it seems like the Ravens have played better from behind so far this year, where it felt like in the past with this team, they're more of a front running team. Like if you give Lamar a two possession lead, then you're not going to be able to stop the run game. They're going to drain the clock. And that's pretty much all she wrote with the Ravens. Great front running team, but seeing them back to back games against the divisional opponent like the Bengals, where Joe Burrow is putting up historic numbers. I mean, 9 touchdowns and almost 1,000 passing yards in back to back games versus this Ravens defense. And you come back twice against this team, score pretty much every time, and then the Bengals just couldn't get it done. And then at the end of the game, I don't really, the refs impacted that game. You could have thrown it to Jamar Chase, and Jamar Chase mentioned, like, hey, yeah, Joe just missed me. Sometimes it's hard to see your receiver when you're open in the end zone, but like, you did have two obvious penalties, but you shouldn't let the ref dictate that game when you're up two possessions where you really shouldn't have been in this position to begin with. And honestly, I really don't like this nonsense where we go for two and try and force overtime. Like, I get trying to go for and win the game, but at the same time, if you get the ball first, you're probably gonna score and win the game. And I know you don't like your odds against Lamar marching down the fields, but at least give yourself a chance. I feel like when you go for two, when you could have tied the game up, you're just leaving a little bit on the table there. Like, I don't love it. And there was another game previously where I think it was the Bucks game, Bucks and Chiefs, were back to back games. The media was like, yeah, why didn't the Tampa Bay Buccaneers go for two? It's like, because you tied the Chiefs and you have an opportunity to go for overtime. So it's like, you get the ball, you have a 50-50 shot to win the game. And I feel like you still have a 50-50 shot to complete a 2 point conversion. And it's a lot tougher when you don't have a run game that's elite, especially with the Cincinnati Bengals. And oh, yeah, your offensive line still sucks.
Yeah, the offensive line still sucks. Chase Brown wasn't able to get going too much on the ground either. But yeah, the thing with this game that frustrates me for the Bengals is like when you're going for two and you're trying to win the game, if you're in a situation like the Bengals where this could be their season, where they need to win this game, I feel like now is maybe not the chance to take that big step in going for two. I get the mentality like Lamar had a perfect game and Derrick Henry was getting his and everyone was getting it theirs on the offensive side for the Ravens. But for the Bengals, they needed to win this game. If the coin toss goes in overtime and they get the ball, they're probably winning this game and they're looking a lot better at 5-5 than 4-6. So I don't love the call. The Ravens couldn't stop Jamar whatsoever. We saw Mike Gesicki get involved as well. But yeah, for the Ravens, my big grief with them is you're in a situation where your season's on the line. And I felt like you kind of blew it. Especially, I didn't really love that 2 point conversion call either. I didn't really understand it. I felt like the Ravens just were all over that play. So they were kind of screwed there. Yeah, and then you mentioned for the Ravens, they come back and they win the game and didn't really feel like it was very hard for them whatsoever. Lamar got it done. Derrick Henry is a fridge, so obviously he got it going. But Bengals, they ruined their opportunity to go back. I think they can still make the playoffs, but this was a massive loss for them.
Yeah, I mean, I think all the Bengals have to do to make the playoffs is split with the Steelers, and outside of that, the assignment's pretty easy. So outside of a major injury, and you're also still doing this right now without T. Higgins, but that shouldn't be a problem when you have someone to the level of a Jamar Chase on your team, when you've spent so much money on your offensive line here. But really, it came down to your defense just couldn't get it done. You couldn't get one stop versus the Ravens when you needed to, and Joe Burrow throws for 5 touchdowns in back-to-back games versus the Ravens, or he throws for 9 touchdowns combined, has two of the best games of his season, plays out of his mind. But at the end of the day, when you needed a drive to ice the game, like it still wasn't enough, and he still wasn't able to get it done. So you still have to put some blame on him here. And then also for the Ravens now, Lamar Jackson has already won 2 MVPs. You may see some voter fatigue is usually the word that people used to nicely say, where the media sometimes just says, we're sick of giving the best player the most valuable player award here, who's putting up the best numbers. And so far, every category for Lamar Jackson passing this season has been better than both of his MVP seasons. Like Lamar Jackson is showing this season that really outside of Patrick Mahomes, there's not really any other quarterbacks who can touch him. There's no really any other quarterbacks who have the same resume as him. And then we saw him versus Josh Allen this season, but he's looked a lot more comfortable this season, and he's looked more dominant, if it's possible, than Josh Allen this season, where it's efficient. He's had the best passing season of his career, and now they're finally just getting him weapons. Like I felt like Lamar Jackson's like, well, he's had Hollywood Brown here, L'Jarius Sneed, and then, okay, we have this guy, Rashad Bateman. He has finally come on this season. We drafted Zay Flowers. He's taken another step forward that we needed to this season. And then you go out there and you get Deontay Johnson, you get Derrick Henry, you draft someone like Isaiah Likely, and then Mark Andrews is suddenly coming alive at the end of the season, which is that final piece for this team to be explosive. So, like, maybe your defense isn't as good this year, but like, do you think they will let Lamar Jackson win another MVP this year? Or do you think it's going to be like, well, you probably are the MVP, but we just want to give it to someone else right now?
I feel like they have to give it to Lamar this season. Just the way he's got the numbers. Last year, I feel like he didn't have the numbers to win MVP, and I actually didn't love him winning MVP last year. This year, he already has as many touchdowns as he had last year. He has less interceptions. His QBR is through the roof, and he's still getting it done on the ground too, even though he's got Derrick Henry. So he's still going to be probably 700 to 800 yards running by the time it's all over. My takeaway from this game with Lamar is like we talk about, the top 5 quarterbacks in the league. Obviously, Patrick Mahomes is at the top because he's won the hardware, he's won the MVPs and everything. But of all the other guys, like whether it's Josh Allen or Joe Burrow or Jalen Hurts, I feel like Lamar Jackson's the only quarterback in this league that can do some things that Patrick Mahomes can't. He can't move like Lamar as much as he can. I think just at this point, if Lamar can win an MVP, like we're going to start putting him in that conversation where you have Brady, which is Mahomes, and you have Peyton Manning, which is Lamar Jackson. Modern day, I think the way Lamar's playing, all he needs left on his resume to go down as a top 10 quarterback of all time is to win a Super Bowl. And if he can do that this year, which I think this is the year to do so, then at this point, like he's got to be in that conversation for top 10 of all time. Just the way that he can move, the way he's developed as a passer over the last 2 years, like he has to win MVP this year. And I think that he'll ultimately win the Super Bowl potentially.
Yeah, no, he's definitely this. Success were really the only other running quarterbacks that had playoff success were Cam Newton. He won an MVP, got to a Super Bowl, but really wasn't as dominant as Lamar has been recently, consistently, especially with some of his completion issues. And then Russell Wilson, had success, but that was because he pretty much had the best player at every position on defense, and then he had Marshawn Lynch at the peak of his powers at the end of his prime there. But Lamar has taken this and taken it to a whole new level, and now this is a situation where it's not that he can win a Super Bowl this year because the road is set up for him to do so. Is he has to win a Super Bowl this year. Like, if you don't do it now, when are you going to do it? And then if you go out there and you don't win a Super Bowl, it's like people are going to hold that against you. And I think he can show up and most likely get it done this year. But I feel like he's going to start to feel a lot of pressure once the Ravens get to the playoffs because, like, if not now, like, when are you going to get to and win the Super Bowl?
Yeah, I mean they've gone all in. I believe Derrick Henry's on a 1 year contract. You went out and you got Deontay Johnson, and so at this point, like you've gone all in offensively. Your defense, you've got a lot of great players that you've been able to draft, thankfully, but those guys are going to need to get paid soon as well. So I think like inevitably, like this is the year they have to do it. You have the Chiefs who lost their number one receiver, and Isaiah Pacheco was banged up. So at this point, like if you don't win it this year, I don't believe that they're ever going to win it at this point, and I think that they will. I feel pretty confident that the Ravens are going to give the Chiefs some trouble, but this is the year to do it. If it's not them, I don't know who else is going to do it in the AFC.
Yeah, I mean, it's a problem though because you do have another team in the AFC battling with you in your division, and when your team that wants to get to the Super Bowl and win it, but you have to go up against a divisional opponent that may not be as good as you, but this season, can we officially say the Steelers are all the way back as like that team towards the end of Big Ben's career when Big Ben really couldn't throw it past 15 yards. He was just beating teams with his wits, which not really what Ben Roethlisberger was known for his backyard football style, but pretty much just beating teams with his mind. I'm smarter than you. I can read every defense, nothing I haven't seen before. And then now you have potentially one of the best Steelers defenses we have seen since they got to the Super Bowl. And face Green Bay in 2010. And now you pair that with the offense that maybe isn't as dominant, but you have Russell Wilson who has playoff experience and he's played well. And god damn it, he showed up in the clutch for you. And you took someone like Mike Williams, who's like Jonathan Mingo with CTE. And then you have George Pickens here. And now Jalen Warren and Najee Harris are showing up for your team in a big way. It seems like the offensive line is clicking. And then you have Fryermuth and Darnell Washington. Like, I feel like if you're talking about challengers for the Ravens after that Commanders and Steelers game, just going on the road up against an unfamiliar opponent, and then just Russell Wilson went out there and got it done. I mean, he threw to Mike Williams, first game with the Steelers, and his first catch is a touchdown. I mean, I feel like if I'm the Ravens, this is the team I want to face at least. Like, you want to get over your demons. Obviously, it's tough to face the Chiefs, and you want the satisfaction of beating Patrick Mahomes, but do I want someone else to take care of the Steelers for me? Yeah, probably, because that would be your third time playing them this year.
Yeah, this Steelers team, I think the fact that Mike Tomlin saw the wherewithal to bench Justin Fields, start Russell Wilson, a guy who's been rejected by the Broncos are paying him $85 million dollars to not play on his team. And the fact that you got him for a league minimum, basically, and he's gone out here, he's thrown 6 touchdowns to 1 interception. The offense looks dynamic. They can push the ball down the field. And I want to say something about Russell Wilson. He's not washed at this point. He has one of the best deep balls in the league at this point, and it's been incredible to watch. I also want to give credit to Arthur Smith, where a lot of people didn't love him being the OC, and I was definitely one of those people too. The fact that both of the running game, which looked just dead in the water last year, can actually move the football and move it well. I mean, they had 140 yards against the Commanders. And then you see George Pickens getting involved, Mike Williams getting involved, Calvin Austin getting involved. The offense has been great. And then the defense, like I think you're right when you say this, whether it's Alec Highsmith and TJ Watt as the two-headed monster, or it's the secondary. You have Joey Porter on the other side too. Like this defense is incredible. And not only that, you
And
went out
Minka.
and stole Pat Queen from the Ravens. So this is probably the best Steelers defense I've seen since those vintage Steelers defenses that had the Troy Polamalu's and James Harrisons of the world. So yeah, you're right. I mean, I'm horrified to face the Steelers if I'm any team in the AFC, But never mind the Ravens. I'm sure the Chiefs don't want to face the Steelers either. And I feel like they're a team that can genuinely win the Super Bowl this year if they can beat one of those two other teams we mentioned.
Yeah, and in the AFC at this point, you can probably still put the Bills above the Steelers, but honestly, as far as like playoff experience with Russ and Mike Tomlin, like the way this offense looks, I would still probably take the Steelers. I feel like it's Steelers, Ravens, and then you have to put the Chiefs there. But that's pretty much one of those teams is going to come out of the AFC. But like overall, what did you think of the game specifically versus the Commanders? Because this was a close game. The Steelers faced some adversity, and you know what? They pulled through in a shootout, which they normally can't do, where they were down. I picked the Steelers to win 27-21, and I'm like, this is ironic. The Steelers are down 27-21, and then they're able to come back, get the touchdown to Mike Williams. Some of the balls to George Pickens that Russell Wilson has thrown, like he's finally been fully unlocked. I'm hyped that we're finally seeing Pickens just do what he can do, which is probably the best 50-50 ball catcher in the league at this point.
Yeah, no, I love that. This game was incredible to watch. You're down 10 second half. You shut down the Commanders to some extent in that second half. They go up 24-14. You get the stops when you need to. You had a hard time stopping them in the first half, but you lock in, you make some adjustments, which is something that Tomlin has been credited for not doing. But George Pickens is unlocked here. They were able to get the stops when they needed to. And then, yeah, just Russ pushing the ball down the field, being clutch when it mattered, which was something that he had a lot of flack with in Denver because he didn't necessarily deliver when it mattered. But yeah, this Steelers team was horrifying. This was a great game. And they also were able to give some trouble to Jaden Daniels, too. I mean, 50% completion rating, 200 passing yards, no touchdowns. Like, they were able to contain a guy who's been the runaway rookie of the year so far. So credit to the Steelers defense. And then also credit to Russell Wilson for being clutch.
Yeah, credit to him for being clutch, and that the reason like the reason why I think that if the Ravens and Steelers face, that the Steelers would have a good chance in the playoffs is just look at what Jamar Chase did to the Ravens, where he absolutely obliterated them. Like, okay, you don't think George Pickens, maybe it's not to the level of dominance that Jamar did it, but you don't think he can keep pace with that if the Ravens are just letting guys run wide open here?
Yeah, I mean, I think, let's see, Jamar Chase had 260. I think George Pickens can get 180 at least in a game like that, especially with the way Russell Wilson's been throwing the ball too.
For
No, I
sure.
think, yeah, the Steelers have got to be, if we're looking at just the league in general, they're probably the third best team in the AFC right now. But I also think that they're one of the only teams that can actually beat the Chiefs or the Ravens right now. And the Bills, I think the Bills are in that conversation, but not to the same extent as the Ravens and Chiefs.
Yeah, not to the same extent as the Ravens and Chiefs. And another scary team to face that we talked about, and it's Tuesday. Still no news from the New York Giants. No news of what's happening with the quarterback. No news of what's happening with the head coach, because I thought if you lose to the Panthers with Bryce Young, who the first part of the season didn't realize that the ball was supposed to go forwards and not backwards, literally had negative yards this season. And then you go out there and suddenly Bryce Young looked competent in that game. There were some throws where I'm like, Bryce Young is kind of dealing right now. And then suddenly Bryce Young looks better at some points in this game than Daniel Jones. The only thing that Daniel Jones was better at this game was running the football. Last time I checked, you're supposed to push the football down the field, and we still haven't heard anything about Brian Dayball, about Daniel Jones being benched. No one has gotten fired, but I want to know why. How do you make it out of Germany after going to overtime and losing? I mean, you immediately fumble the ball here. The Panthers were dead. Literally, all you had to do was not turn the ball over. Best case scenario, or if you don't turn the ball over, worst case scenario, you escape with a tie there, but you're still the Giants. You've still played some pretty solid games this year defensively, and now Bryce Young goes out there, plays pretty decent. Chuba Hubbard runs all over you. Like this Giants team just looks dead right now. But honestly, credit to Dave Canales because he was given an absolute dumpster fire of a situation where you have Bryce Young instead of CJ Stroud. You get fucked over because your team doesn't know how to manage your draft picks, and then you let two of your best defensive players go. But overall, this is a team that has played competitive in some games. They actually look like they might have a direction, whether it's with Bryce Young or not. Probably not with Bryce Young, but the fact that he looked that bad to start the season and now he looks semi fixed as a quarterback and he's playing because Andy Dalton's hurt, like, credit to Dave Canales for actually turning this team around. And I think he's making the most he can possibly can out of a really bad situation.
Yeah, I agree. First, for the Giants, it hasn't been official yet, but it seems like they're probably going to bench Daniel Jones after this game, which continues on to the trajectory of the Raiders lose to them, they lose their offensive coordinator, and then for anybody that loses to the Panthers, somebody loses their job. I think Daniel Jones, by the time this airs and by the time this is live, Daniel Jones will be benched, and then it'll be Drew Lock season. Especially like for the Panthers, I think the best thing that could have happened to Bryce Young was him getting benched. Because if you're a number one overall pick and you're playing as badly as Bryce Young had played through year one and through year two, for you to get benched at that point, like what's the floor at this point? It kind of reminds me a little bit of when Zach Wilson got benched and then he had to play when Aaron Rodgers got hurt. You're going out there and you don't really care because at the end of the day, Panthers are probably not going to pick you back up. They're probably going to trade you next year. So you might as well just go out there and ball. And he looks a lot more confident than he did before. He's been able to move. He's able to read the defense a little bit better. And that's credit to Dave Canales, but also credit to Bryce Young, who I think in the right situation could actually be a starting quarterback. Maybe he's not your franchise guy, but maybe like a Sam Darnold build. I think he's capable of doing so, maybe to a higher degree. But for the Giants, at what point do you just give up at this point? Daniel Jones this year, I have his stats in front of me. He has 8 touchdowns to 7 picks, and my memory escapes me. When has he scored a touchdown? He has not scored a touchdown on his own field in 2 years. And this team has been continuously giving this man all the opportunities at this point. And Daniel and Brian Dable was kind of hush hush on whether they continue with Daniel Jones. But if they don't continue forward, like this is the one guy that's been the biggest anomaly for me. You play like shit for 5 years. You have one season where you're okay at best, and then you continue to be dog shit after. This guy has had so many chances where I feel like in any other situation he gets benched, he gets cut, and he's out of the league. Why is Daniel Jones still in the league, and why is he still getting paid top money? It's it's an anomaly to me, and I don't understand it. So for the Giants, yeah, like they need to make changes. They're 2-8 now, and I don't see a win on their schedule in the near future, except maybe for the Cowboys. But
Yeah.
their defense isn't the problem. They have a good receiver. They have decent running backs as well. Daniel Jones is the problem. Get rid of Daniel Jones. Put in Tommy DeVito. Put in Drew Lock. Whoever you want to put in there, and start winning games. Because I think they could win games with a different quarterback.
Yeah, they definitely can win games with another quarterback. I just can't wait for next season when it's Tennessee. They trade for Daniel Jones to come in here, and he's going to compete with Will Levis to push him in training camp here. And then we're going to have Will Levis competing with Daniel Jones. And honestly, I can see the vision right now. I can see Daniel Jones in a Tennessee Titans uniform, and I think it's going to happen. And then on the flip side, I thought as soon as the Panthers benched Bryce Young, if I'm Miami, even though with how bad he's looked, I'm giving them a call because Tua has had concussion issues. Looks like he's going to go the CT ESPN route with his career. But overall, like, you need a good backup quarterback, or at least a quarterback you can develop, because we don't know the long term future of Tua here. So I think Miami should be someone that should be in the running to go out there and scoop up Bryce Young, because I think he could come in and at least play better than the Brett Hundleys, the Skylar Thompsons of the world. Like, I think Bryce Young, he was a first overall pick, and maybe he was a bust, but sitting with Miami under Mike McDaniels for a year or two and stepping in for the usually 5 to 6 games that Tua's hurt, I think with some legitimate weapons in Waddle and Tyreek Hill, like, I think he'd be fine, and I think he'd be a good backup for Miami.
I like the Dolphins' vision. Another team I think that could fit that is the Jets because Aaron Rodgers, he hasn't looked fantastic this year. and they don't have a backup at this point. Like they're going to be bad enough that they could probably draft a quarterback after they lose yet again on Sunday. But they don't have a future. And at this point, you've gone all in on your team to be competitive. And I guess this could be a good game to pivot to the Jets and Cardinals game. But the Jets are terrible, but they have weapons. They have Brees Hall. They have Garrett Wilson. Devontae Adams is there for the foreseeable future. For the Jets, like, what's your backup plan? Because this has failed more miserably than I would have thought. I didn't think the Jets were going to be great this year. I didn't even know if they were a playoff team, but they are maybe the most pathetic team in all of football at this point with how Aaron Rodgers has been, with the firing of Robert Saleh, all these acquisitions going all in just for them to be 3-7 at this point. And you got steamrolled by the Cardinals, who have actually been playing pretty good football. So I give credit to them, but the Jets, their season's lost. What's their vision at this point? It's just been a complete disappointment.
Yeah, no, I am very curious to know what that vision is for the New York Jets here, because or East Rutherford Jets at this point is what they become, because you come into the season clearly skeptical about Robert Saleh here, so you're like, okay, let's give it a few weeks, and then the game before we can actually compete for a top spot in our division after we lose to one of the only undefeated teams, that's when we're going to decide to remove our coach. And if you had that inkling in the back of your mind before the season, you do realize that Aaron Rodgers is going to be 41 years old. And he's someone who I could see just being like, you know what? This was fun. I tried it, but I think I'm going to retire. And you probably have another year or two at best. And in the NFL, you have to have a lot of luck to go out there and win a Super Bowl. So if you have a chance where everything can go right, why the hell would you remove your coach in the middle of the season and then run it with the interim head coach that's basically waving the white flag on your entire season? And then you brought Robert Saleh into the season knowing that maybe there were some issues there. I think you should have stuck out the rest of the season. I don't think he should have been fired before the Dennis Allens of the world, before someone like Mike McCarthy. He's been holding that team together without a quarterback. Now he finally has a chance. Like, you remove him from the situation. Like, you just punted an entire season when you have Aaron Rodgers. And guess what? Aaron Rodgers is going to retire in a year or two. Like, what's your plan after that? Because he's going to win you enough games, try and run the table at the end of the year, where he's going to play you out of a top pick. He's not going to want you to draft a quarterback, or he's going to get all pissy because, like, oh, you don't want to win now, give me the best opportunity to win, or not think about your future and have a quarterback. And then you're going to be screwed again. Like, and you're still screwed. You're still one of the worst teams in your league, but you just now have a 40-year-old Hall of Famer, and you never had a plan at head coach. So it's like, no, the Jets never had a plan. Anyone who said that the Jets were in the Super Bowl bubble needs to get fired immediately. There are just certain things you say that turn out so comically dumb and are so comically obvious that it's like, okay, if you want to make a bold prediction about this bad team being good, that's fine. But the Jets, your fandom getting in the way and saying they're going to be a Super Bowl contender is absolutely embarrassing. Like, jobs in the media definitely need to be lost at that, specifically at, the Disney network.
What's hilarious to me about the Jets is there are certain teams in the NFL that deserve to be good, and yet they just aren't. And then there are other teams that deserve to suck because everything that they do is the wrong way. They were not one quarterback away from being in the Super Bowl bubble. You had a good defense. You go out and get Aaron Rodgers. I respect the grind. But at the end of the day, if you look at Aaron Rodgers' numbers this year compared to his last year in Green Bay, they're really not that far off. You see a guy who slowly regresses as he enters year 40. Like, he's going to be 41 this year. His QBR is 86. His QBR last year was 91, 26 touchdowns, 12 picks. He's got 15-7 this year. So probably be right around then by the time the season's over. You traded for a guy who's over the hill rather than going for somebody, whether it be in the draft or going for a better quarterback that was already available. So the Jets deserve to struggle there. And then for Aaron Rodgers, like when he was on Pat McAfee earlier today, he says, one thing we can play for is pride. This is a team that's defeated at this point, and they're lost, and it's just what's the point? And the thing is Aaron Rodgers is going to ride off into the sunset. He's going to make millions of dollars, and he's going to go down as one of the greatest of all time because that's already submitted for them. He has nothing to play for. Where the Jets, like, what's your vision at this point? Your team is screwed far beyond just this year. Next year, you draft a quarterback, maybe, but you're done. And then this is the kicker. Even if Aaron Rodgers retires next year, they still owe him $24 million. They're still screwed even next year. Even if Aaron Rodgers decides to be sipping coconut drinks in Mar-Lago, they're still going to be owing him $24 million,
Yeah, no.
which to me is the kicker.
Yeah, it is the kicker there, but shout out for the Cardinals because we didn't even mention them in this entire rant. They're coming out there and I don't know, they're kind of been kicking ass the past 3 weeks where, that Miami win looks a lot better after we watched Monday Night Football. And then you won last week. You've already beaten the 49ers. You've already beaten the Rams in your division. Like, you split with both of those teams, which is pretty much the best you can do. You're still leading your division at this point. Like, the Cardinals, credit to them. They struggled. They've looked awful at some points this season, but you're still going out there and you put up 31 points, 31-6, blowing out a team like the Jets. Like, that's still a hard task. And they went out there and, Cardinals are doing it. Like, credit to them.
Yeah, credit to them. Their defense has been really good. I really like they have a pretty decent linebacking core. Buda Baker's always been really good, but Mac Wilson, Zaven Collins, and then they've had a couple of injuries to their secondary, but overall, like some of their pieces that they drafted over the last 2 years is really starting to come out. Credit to Jonathan Gannon for getting this team up to speed. They've won their last 4 games, and then if you look back at their losses this year, these are games that you can kind of shake off a little bit. They lose to the Bills, but they were up week one. They lose to the Lions. Okay, the Lions are a juggernaut. The Commanders, okay, they're a pretty good team at this point. And they lose to the Packers. Those are their 4 losses. Otherwise, they've beaten the Rams, they've beaten the Niners, they've beaten the Chargers, Dolphins, Bears, and now they beat the Jets. And I look forward to the next couple of weeks where they face the Seahawks twice, who are in disarray. They face the Vikings, who are clearly going down, not up. And then you have the Patriots and Panthers here. Like, realistically, like, I think the Cardinals are going to win their division. And I wasn't so sold up until this game. Their defense is playing well. Kyler's playing really good football. And I think they might actually win their division this time, especially after the
Yeah,
Rams lost in Monday night.
yeah, for sure. And I like their odds too, especially with the 49ers. Like, those injuries will still continue to pile up here. And I think the real test that will decide it, as crazy as it sounds, like if they go out there and they beat the Vikings and it's pretty comfortable, I think then I can buy into them winning their division. That's just one of those games that's a test where both of these teams have looked really good. They both have a good record. They've beaten some good teams here, but I want to see how they match up against each other to see how they kind of separate themselves from that tier three into kind of the lower tier two in the NFL, maybe from tier like the bottom of tier three up to the top there. I think that's like a really telling matchup for both teams. And, maybe it's a bad matchup because Minnesota will be able to give Kyler Murray problems. But overall, I think that's the game that's really going to determine if they win their division. And if you beat the Seahawks twice, I feel like that makes things a lot easier. But if you lose a game to the Seahawks, I feel like your path to the top of the NFC West is going to be tough.
Yeah, I can agree with that. Um, I think that they have those 2 easy wins. I think Patriots and Panthers, they should be fine if they split with the Seahawks. And then if they can beat the Rams and Niners again, then I think they'll be in good position. We've seen James Conner. He's been kind of bounced around. He played decently this game, good receiving back. Um, And then Marvin Harrison had a touchdown in this game. He's been kind of inconsistent his first year, but overall, I just like their weapons. I like their offense as a whole. Kyler, I mean, 22 of 24. He's been playing really good. So if Kyler can play at his best, like what we saw in 2021, if James Conner can get it going as well and Marvin Harrison can be what he is, then I think they can win their division. And didn't believe in that for a long time, but I do think that they actually have a pretty good chance now, if not at least the playoffs. I think they can definitely make the playoffs at this point. So I think it'll be a telling sign. Kyler, I mean, 91% completions, 12 touchdowns, 3 picks this year. He's looking better than I expected, to be honest.
Yeah, and it'll just be how into it he is if they get to the playoffs. But I think they can definitely be a wild card team. And then we kind of had the Cardinals there, where this is a team that can make the wild card. We're not sure if they will, but they're definitely a team. We put them in the wild card bubble coming into the season, and you know what? We opened it up. We were right again. Who knew? But a team, player you haven't been too high on, haven't been smoking too much of what he's been rolling up for you. Bo Nix coming into the season, and everyone's trying to be like, oh my God, Bo Nix goes up against the Chiefs, is 22 for 30 for 215 yards and 2 touchdowns. But, you know, the Broncos only get 14 points in this game. And then you couldn't help but laugh when the Chiefs blocked the field goal there. Like, you think you have the Chiefs, they have an entire winning season against you. And now the Broncos are almost inventing ways to lose to the Chiefs. And it literally seems like the Chiefs are just doing the bare minimum for every assignment that they need to do to pass. Like, we've all had classes that we don't like. And really, your GPA doesn't matter when you're in college at all. So, we've all had times where we just go there, put in the bare minimum. We end up getting done. They're like, I'd like to see you improve on this, this, and that. But you still get the passing grade. And the Chiefs this season, they're like, we don't need to study for these teams. We just need to show up, clock in, and clock out. And that's about it. And that's been enough to beat every single opponent this season. And it still blows my mind that people are like, oh my God, Patrick Mahomes this season. But at the end of the day, as soon as they block that field goal, you're like, in the back of your mind, you're thinking the same thing I was.
Yeah, this is a team that if they don't like the fact that they blocked the field goal to go 9-0, the fact that they've had all of these weird occurrences each week where they somehow pull out the win, I'm convinced now that they're going to go 17-0. And then people are going to start saying, is this the worst undefeated team of all time? Which I think would be crazy to say. But no matter what it is, the Broncos did everything that you would want to do to beat the Chiefs. They shut down the run. They relatively contained Patrick Mahomes. I mean, he only had one touchdown and, like 60% completion rating, right? They held the Chiefs to 16 points. So, like, that's a recipe for success against them. Not only that, if you told me that Bo Nix was going to complete 70% of his passes and they were going to outrun the Chiefs, I'd say, yeah, the Broncos won that game and they deserve the credit there. But the fact that the Chiefs were able to block that field goal is just destiny at this point. The fact that the Chiefs also shut them down in the second half is also a really telling sign. Like, no matter what, like the Chiefs are not, they can win so many different ways. And the Broncos, like, ultimately, I just think that they're a below average team and the Chiefs just find ways to win each and every week. And credit to the Chiefs here.
No, credit to the Chiefs. And then do you think this was like a worthy effort from the Broncos, or you still think like, no, this is still a team that's just not, they're just not ready yet?
I think it's a little bit of. I think that they deserve credit, right? They held the Chiefs to 16 points, and their defense played very well. But at the same time, I think this Broncos team, like Bo Nix, has exceeded my expectations. I'll be honest, but I also still think that he's not quite ready yet. Their offense is still not a very efficient offense. The running game is kind of what they lean on for the most part, but I still think they're just not ready yet at the end of the day. Bo Nix needs maybe a little bit more time to develop, and I just don't think they're legitimate when you have teams like the Texans and the Bills and the Ravens and Bengals and Steelers and pretty much everybody in the AFC North. Like, I just think that there's too many other good teams in the AFC for the Broncos to get into that seventh seed. I think there's too many teams that are vying for that same spot that are better than they are.
Yeah, no, it's going to be a tough race for that last seed there. So good step forward this season without Russell Wilson. But I do think there may be a part of the Broncos that is kind of going to be cursed, and it's kind of going to be lingering after how they treated Russell Wilson here. And part of that was Russ, definitely his ego there. But the fact that Sean Payton went out of his way to basically embarrass him, hang him out to dry when Russell Wilson was begging Seattle to fire Pete Carroll and hire Sean Payton's like you kind of met his hero at head coach and then you just left the guy out to dry there. So I do think there's going to be some bad vibes that follow around the Broncos for a little bit. another team that has some bad vibes following around it, but has exercised it. The Saints. I mean, my God,
Yes.
holy Marquez Valdez Scantling, MVS falls into the Saints' lap here. And then Derek Carr, when he has a guy who runs a great go route, what does Derek Carr do? Put up some gaudy numbers, and he was finding MVS of all people was the Saints savior. And, the Falcons are a team I expect to be the third or the fourth seed. Don't expect them to really push for that number one seed or number two seed. Pretty much have their division locked up here, especially with Tampa being on a skid here. So I do think this is more of a team that's just relieved that Dennis Allen isn't here. MVS goes crazy in this game. Derek Carr gets the win. But was this just the Saints we finally fired our head coach, we got a new one, or does this worry you about the Falcons? Or you're like, no, kind of a divisional opponent here?
I think divisional opponent and the fact that they exercise the demon of Dennis Allen. You've seen this a lot, like whether it was the Raiders when they fired Josh McDaniels, and there's been scenarios in the past too, like the Jaguars when they beat the Colts, exercising their demons from Urban Meyer. So I think that that's a real thing. Like you fire a head coach that clearly wasn't liked in the locker room. I think that's a big thing. I think the Saints will go back down to earth eventually, but my biggest takeaway from this game was when Marquez Valdez Stanley had his first catch. I'm like, oh, he's on the Saints. That's cool. I forgot that Marquez because he's kind of bounced around since leaving the Packers. I'm like, okay, that's cool. And then he gets 2 touchdowns and it has 100 yards receiving. I'm like, oh, okay, that's
On
cool.
three
Good.
catches.
Yeah, 3 catches for 100 yards. I'm like, okay, that's pretty cool. And then Alvin Kamara does what he does, but I don't think that this is going to be continuing on for the Saints. But it's great to see them get a win. I think the Falcons. It doesn't worry me too much. I mean, at the end of the day, Kirk Cousins still threw for 300 yards. Bijan Robinson rushed for over 100. They were still able to move the ball. I just think they weren't able to execute in the red zone, and Young Hoku missed a few kicks, but overall, I'm not super worried about the Falcons divisional game, and the Saints were just on a different mode today, which I don't think they'll go back to afterwards.
Yeah, no, just seeing MVS go for 3 catches and 2 touchdowns over 100 yards, that was just hilarious to me. That's just something you look at, you smile, and you're like, yeah, football is the greatest sport here. Just reminds you any team can beat anyone on any given day. And now the Falcons, they're probably going to be a team that goes out there and gets bounced in the first round. Maybe you win one playoff game, but that's their ceiling. That's the expectation. And have they proven otherwise? No. I actually think they've been better so far than what I expected, especially with Kirk Cousins coming off an Achilles injury. But I think they're going to be set up, especially now that you have a solid number one quarterback that you took in the draft this year. I think the Falcons are actually building a great future here after Kirk Cousins, and this may be an Alex Smith situation. So credit to the Saints here for going out there and getting that win and staying in the NFC South, a team that just can't catch a single break. My God, every time I watch the Tampa Bay Buccaneers play, it is so painful. You talk about the Chiefs doing the bare minimum to win every single game. It's like the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are doing the bare minimum to lose every single game without Mike Evans, and he's going to be coming back soon after their bye week. I believe he's going to come back for their next game here. So you're going to get Mike Evans back, and hopefully you can make a playoff push, but this was a game you were in it versus the San Francisco 49ers and just couldn't get it done again. And this has kind of been every single game the past few weeks. And it's against really good competition. And it seems like they've just been running into better opponents. But if they had their full roster on offense, or at least just Mike Evans, I feel like they would be winning some of these games and they wouldn't be so far out of it. But maybe they can still make a playoff push, but this was just another tough stinger.
Yeah, I mean, this is how it's been. They had the Ravens game, which actually, no, we can go further back. We can go to the Falcons' first game where it went down to overtime. You just had to face Hall of Fame Kirk Cousins. No big deal. They get the loss in a heartbreaking overtime loss. And then you beat the Saints. And then the Ravens game, another game that it's fairly close for most of it. The Chiefs game, which I think if they win the coin toss in overtime, they potentially beat the Chiefs. And then this Niners game, just absolutely heartbreaking. I still think that they can make a push for that wild card because they do have a pretty easy schedule coming up. But Baker Mayfield, you want to talk about a guy with guts. Baker Mayfield, this poor guy. I mean, that stiff arm that he had on Nick Bosa, still getting that first down despite it. This guy is playing his ass off, and it doesn't deliver. Even if you look at the stats, it doesn't tell the full story. I feel for Baker Mayfield. I feel for the Bucks. This is a team that I think is still going to be good for the foreseeable future with Baker, but this season it just seems like it's lost. Even though the season isn't quite over yet, they can still run the table and potentially make that playoff spot. But talk about a team that's just lost in the most heartbreaking way all season. I feel for
No,
them. But
they've
yeah,
lost in the most heartbreaking way possible. And it's sad because Baker Mayfield is in his grocery store Ted era, where, he's going out in the back room with a turnip and selling it to a family of four. And then every week, Todd Bowles sits him down and says, that took guts. Really took guts going out there to do that. So I think, Baker's playing great, but hopefully they make a push for the playoffs because I think if you go up against a 2 seed, who would that be? Probably either the Eagles or the Commanders, probably the Eagles at this point. Like a rematch from last year. Okay. That sounds like a fun matchup. And the Eagles and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers have played each other a lot. So I feel like that could be a fun game if you end up sliding into that 7 seed.
yeah. Well, here's their schedule the next month, right? They face the Giants next week, and then they have the Panthers, the Raiders. They face the Chargers, which who knows, and then they face the Cowboys, the Panthers, and Saints. So I feel like the next 7 games that they have left, I think they could go 5-2 in that stretch and end up being 9-8 again. But I think that ultimately that Panthers game, I didn't think this was going to ever worry me when I looked at the schedule at the beginning of the season, but the way the Panthers are playing, I don't know, anything's possible. But I think they can still make the playoffs, but they're going to be fighting the last week of the season to get in at this point with how the season's gone to this point.
Yeah, definitely. And it's probably going to be, the Vikings are going to be there competing for a wild card spot, and then the Niners, Rams, and Cardinals are all going to be there for a wild card and their division. And then you'll have a team, like the Vikings and like the Bucks in there. And speaking of, we've had so many. I feel like this year we've had a lot of games that have felt like watching, and I'll never forget it. And I feel like we watched this game together, and it sums up every single bad game. And it should be the award we give out is the San Francisco Jimmy Garoppolo versus Russell Wilson on the Broncos award. And we had one of those with 12-7 Minnesota
Ugh.
doing anything they can to lose this game. I mean, all three of Sam Darnold's interceptions in the red zone, or at least two of them, at the worst possible time. And then Mac Jones, same exact thing. Guess who's back? Back again to his normal pathetic self, Mac Jones. I mean, 14 for 22, 111 yards, 2 interceptions. If that's not a Mac Jones stat line, I don't know what it is. And then Sam Darnold, Sam Dangerous, turning back the clock, not the past week, the past few weeks here. Sam Darnold's been getting the interception bug, and he's lucky he has a great team around him, and he doesn't look completely incompetent the way he has, but he's looking like he's turning into, okay, this is a guy who's played well, played relatively clean turnover free football, but now it's kind of like when Ryan Fitzpatrick first gets to a team and then slowly starts to unravel at the end of the year, where you still can win with him, but he's not making it very easy on you, because this was a game that you dominated the Jaguars. Like, this should have easy been 28-7.
If you look at the stats too, the crazy part, they had 400 yards of offense to 143. This is one of those games that if you just gave me the stats without the score, 28-10 first downs, 400 to 140 passing, just total yards. You told me turnover battle was tied and they owned the time of possession. They had the ball for 42 minutes this game. You mustered up 12 points and it was 12-7. Like, this game was just awful to watch. It was pathetic. And like, with Sam Darnold, like, at the end of the day, where the Vikings are this season is already impressive, and how he's played at this point. Sam Darnold's proven like he could be a starter on some team that's in transition. Like he's a good transitional quarterback, I guess. But at the end of the day, this Vikings game, like I wish both of these teams lost because the Vikings sitting there at 7-2, knocking on the door of the Lions in that division, is just a joke. Like this team, each week they've regressed since they lost their undefeated streak, and they haven't necessarily played fantastic. They beat the Colts last week, but I just I'm not super impressed with what I've seen the last month or so for the Vikings, and I still think that they're going to continuously going downhill. But this game was hideous. I mean, this is maybe the ugliest game of the year so far.
Yeah, it was one of them. Is it a Broncos, any Broncos Jets? I don't know. Probably not.
Yeah,
That
that's the
game's
bar
tough.
right now. Is the 10-9.
Yeah, 10-9's the bar. Like they won a game where they only had field goals, didn't get any touchdowns. But at the end of the day, the thing we have to put in context with the Minnesota Vikings is they weren't supposed to be where they're at the beginning of the year. And, they're winning close games against bad teams like the Colts and like the Jacksonville Jaguars here. And they're going to pick up still some of those easy wins. But this is a team that's not supposed to be in the conversation at all coming into the season. And I thought they would be a lot better than most people thought they would be. But I thought they would definitely have moments like this, especially with Darnold and McCarthy. And that was the worry. And, November football, December football, that's kind of when teams start to turn into who you thought they would be. But, like, it's still impressive what they've done so far. But are they a contender? Like, no, they're not going to win a playoff game, but they're still ahead of schedule with. They're supposed to be in a rebuild, and right now it's feeling more like a soft reboot, which, okay, that'll work.
Yeah, which is yeah, that works. Now what the takeaway from this game is, I guess it's been the takeaway all season for them is their defense has been spectacular this year. They brought in Brian Flores, and their defense I feel like was what brought them to 5-0, and also what's brought them to 7-2 to this point. Now that there's obviously some head coaches that are going to be gone, and there's already some teams that are already firing their head coach. Do you see a scenario where Brian Flores gets a head coaching job next year, where how
Yeah.
great he's played here, or do you think maybe he stays here and continues building with the Vikings?
He may stay, continue to build with the Vikings. It depends on what he wants. Defensive coordinators, like, really, like, you have to take the opportunity when it opens up for you. Like, when you're an offensive coordinator, you're pretty comfy with who you are. You can pick and choose, but I feel like just certain teams aren't looking for a defensive head coach. So honestly, would I be surprised if Brian Flores was the head coach for the New York Jets next season? No, not at all.
Yeah, I knew that was going to go that route. Yep. That makes a lot of sense, honestly. You might as well just touch every team in that division while you're at it. I mean, I think he would be he'd be a good I think he'd be right up there with like how Robert Saleh coached, maybe a little bit better. So I wouldn't hate that, but I'd
Maybe.
like to see him get a head coaching job because I felt like in Miami there was just a conflict of interest with him and the owner, where the owner just didn't seem to like he really wanted Brian Flores there, and Brian Flores wanted Herbert over Tua, which has aged pretty good overall. I'd like to see him get a head coaching. I think he deserves a second chance in the NFL as a head coach. He's been a great coordinator.
Honestly, he won that divorce. If it was because of a disagreement between Justin Herbert and Tua, what are
He
we
won.
doing here?
Think about how much better that Dolphins team would be
Dad,
with two with
why are
Herbert.
you such a bitch?
Yeah,
Literally. But the Titans, they had a game. Will Levis is back in action here. Throwing great touchdown pass to Calvin Ridley here. And, we had all of the highs and all of the lows of Will Levis in this game. But, we didn't have any interceptions. He played fairly efficient, didn't really throw over 200 yards. Seems like he's a little bit more tame in this game. Had two touchdowns here, both of them to Calvin Ridley. And then the Chargers went out there. Then they just kind of did their thing. Didn't really look spectacular, but they're now 6-3. They've looked impressive at some points, but I feel like the Chargers, the thing you can give them credit for is they're losing to the teams that they probably should lose to. In retrospect, that Cardinals loss doesn't look as bad now with what the Cardinals have been doing. And then they're going out there and beating all of the teams that they should beat. So I feel like that's really all you can ask from the Chargers, and they've surpassed my expectations so far. And you're setting yourself up in a position where if you go out there and win on Sunday Night Football next week, you might win your division for sure. I believe it's either Monday or Sunday Night Football, but they're playing the Bengals. And if you win that game, you could potentially knock out the Bengals because if you miss out on the playoffs, that's probably going to be the team that replaces you in the standings, especially record wise. If you lose a few games, maybe a game you shouldn't, and the Bengals beat you and have the tiebreaker, like this is a game that is probably going to make or break your season.
Yeah, I it should be interesting to see. The thing that the Chargers have done is you would think that with them losing their two main offensive weapons the last decade, that they would be a lot worse. But I really think give credit to Jim Harbaugh and setting in there. Their defense from last year to this year has been way better. I think they have the lowest points allowed in all of football. Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins, rejects from the Ravens. They come in and they play well for you. They've hit on a couple of draft picks too. Their offensive lineman they took fifth overall, Joe Alt. He's been good for them. And Lad McConkey hasn't been overwhelmingly great, but I feel like he's a player that if you keep building that offense, you get some more receivers around them. I think he's going to be a nice piece for them overall. So I think the Chargers are going in the right direction. They kind of remind me a little bit of the Vikings, where they're kind of doing a soft reboot and they're doing a little bit of a rebuild, but they're ahead of schedule. They're 6-3 now, and their schedule does get a lot tougher down the stretch. They have the Bengals, Ravens, Falcons, and Chiefs all in a row. But if they can go out of there and still being, let's say they're 7 or say they're 8-5 at that point, then I think that they're a lock for the playoffs, which we'll see how that goes on Sunday night with the Bengals.
Yeah, and honestly, like if Vlad McConkey was playing with Tom Brady, he may be the best receiver of all time. I mean, he has all of the attributes of a Tom Brady receiver that he loves, not just because he's white, but he's a shorter, athletic slot receiver. He's like basically if Julian Edelman had wheels. Not that Julian Edelman wasn't fast, but like he's like one of those guys where like Tom Brady would love him. And with this Chargers team, like you hit on everything important, but I feel like at this point, like they haven't really opened it up for Justin Herbert, and they really don't have the weapons to do that. But he's looking like probably the most talented game manager of all time because he's not putting up like the same numbers as Burrow, even someone like Jordan Love, Lamar, or Josh Allen here. But what he's doing is he's just not losing you the game. Like he's not going to be really the reason why you lose necessarily. But with Justin Herbert, when it comes down to a playoff game, do I think he's going to be the reason why you win? Probably not at this point with what I've seen from him.
Yeah, I think in the right scenario, if the Chargers can keep building that defense and they can bolster up the receivers for him, then I think that they can make a playoff run next year, maybe the year after. He's played super clean this year. He only has one interception to this point, 11-1. Uh, Granted, he's only thrown for 1,800 yards, but I think Herbert's definitely one of those guys that's capable of having a playoff run, but just getting the pieces around him is important. I feel like he's going to be a guy where you've compared him to Matt Stafford. I feel like that's a good comparison if we're talking about comparing him to 2000s quarterbacks, where in the perfect situation, like the Rams in 2021, they have a great defense and they have great receivers around him and a good running game. Then that's when he's going to really do great. But I don't think he's going to elevate the team like someone like a Lamar or Patty or Joe Burrow or Josh Allen would.
No. Yeah, and the thing is like if Stafford and Matt Ryan can make a Super Bowl, so can you. And the whole argument now is going to be God damn it, if Nick Foles can win a Super Bowl, why can't you? If you're one of the top, 15 most talented quarterbacks in the world.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Let's talk about a team that was extremely disappointing this week and just kind of eliminated any expectation that I had moving forward for this team this season. I'm talking about the Bears and Patriots game.
God.
The Bears going into the season, right? This team reminds me a lot of the Jets, but the opposite. They're like the anti Jets where they do the right thing. They traded back. They got Caleb Williams first overall, highly coveted prospect. They go out and get him receivers. And yeah, they're not necessarily in win now mode, but they're still a team that should be competitive for a playoff spot. and they have just been one of the most disappointing teams all season long. Whether it's Caleb Williams and whether it's him and whether or not he's a, a franchise quarterback remains to be seen. But there's something wrong with the Bears. They have been pathetic. I think that's the right word to use for this Bears team. DeAndre Swift, he'll either rush for 100 yards or 10 yards. The receivers, which they have plenty of great receivers on that team, just can't get the ball to them. And then Caleb Williams just getting killed. Took 9 sacks against the Patriots in this game, and they muster up 3 points. This is what cost them Shane Waldron his job, thank God. But over the last few weeks, they scored 15, 9, and 3. So they're regressing. So I guess next week against the Packers, you can slate them for a good old goose egg. This just team has just been extremely disappointing at this point. Do you think this is more on Caleb Williams or more on like a Matt Eberflus and the coaching staff?
It has to be the coaching staff. I don't like when people come out here and then bash a rookie and they're like, "Oh my god, it's your first season here. You haven't even played a full year in the NFL. You're being compared to Patrick Mahomes and then we're supposed to say now it's Caleb Williams' fault for your job?" Like, no, Caleb Williams is the number 1 pick and, rookie quarterbacks still take a while to learn and develop, and when you have someone who's been one of the worst offensive coordinators bouncing around the league, that's on Matt Eberflus for not having the right coordinator for his quarterback here. You don't have one of the better offensive lines in the league, and the fact that the offensive line just left Caleb Williams on the ground without going over there to pick him up, like, what is that? Like, this is his first year in the league. You are starting him right away. Now, it's like we can't be blaming rookies for an entire team's situation. Like, sure, maybe you can argue Caleb Williams, like, isn't Patrick Mahomes? Yeah, but mostly no one is here. And is it ridiculous when you hear someone like Nick Wright putting the Bears in the Super Bowl before the season? Was that a ridiculous take? Absolutely. But does that mean we need to blame a rookie for their problems? No, like, this isn't on the rookie. Like, he needs time to develop. He needs coaches in the right situation who can actually help him. But you decided to flashback from Russell Wilson's worst years of his career, get the mastermind from that guy onto your team, and somehow he's supposed to be the one developing your quarterback. Like, no, this is a complete mismanagement of talent. And you bring in D Swift, who's played fine for you, but he comes and goes, and you have one of the lower offensive lines in the league. And for a rookie quarterback, like, he's just gonna struggle. Is he gonna be someone like Andrew Luck or Joe Burrow? No. But could he be like a Justin Herbert type quarterback? Probably. And that's probably where Caleb Williams is going to be in his career. Does that mean he's a complete bust? Like, no. Is it his fault? No. Like, he needs to take some blame, but he's still a rookie. Like, Josh Allen wasn't good until year 3. It's like, I feel like we can give the guy a little bit of a break here.
Let's give him a little bit more of a leash because I feel like there's still been games this season where I see enough to be okay. This guy has the talent to be really great. Like I point to the Carolina game. He played a decent game against the Jags as well in London. Like I see enough with Caleb Williams to say, yeah, this guy's a franchise quarterback at least for now. You go out and get him the right offensive coordinator, or yet better yet, fire Matt Eberflus and get someone like a maybe it's a Ben Johnson or a Bobby Slowick for the Texans. Like maybe you go out and get that guy and you get him the right personnel. I think you could start to see him develop pretty nicely. Part of his problem, he holds the ball a little bit too long. He does take a lot of sacks. I mean, 9 sacks this game, and then the Cardinals game, 6 sacks. Like, I just think he's going to kill his confidence if we keep going at this trajectory. He hasn't scored a touchdown since London. So it's like, obviously he's going to struggle in this situation. I think the coaching staff has done everything they can to make it harder for him instead of making it easier. Give him some nice, easy completions that can help him boost his confidence. But right now, I just think that he's going to continue to struggle this season if they don't fix it, which hopefully firing Shane Waldron will fix it a little bit.
Yeah, and him being decisive and not like, that's a coaching issue at the end of the day. Like, sure, if he holds it for too long his rookie year, like, That's expected because, Tom Brady was talking about how like quarterbacks aren't being coached anymore in college. It's college teams, it's not college programs anymore where we're teaching players how to read defenses. And now he comes into the NFL. You have to learn a massive playbook and then also simultaneously have to pick up reading defenses, and then the weight of the world is on his shoulder. Like Tom Brady was spot on when he's Matt Eberflus has been a great coach for this team, but if you're gonna kind of start a new chapter for the Bears, like you need to either wait it out with him next year, or it's like he needs to get a better offensive coordinator here.
Yeah, I think Matt Eberflus is a fine defensive coordinator. Like their defense has played well. This game, they played still. I mean, they held the Patriots to 19 points, and they've been one of the better defenses in the league. So I don't think that part is the problem. But it's either Matt Eberflus needs to get an absolute stud offensive coordinator, or they just need to go and get an offensive minded head coach. Their defense is super talented. They have talent everywhere on that side, and they have talent on the offensive side. But if their offense can be an efficient offense moving forward, then this team absolutely can be in the Super Bowl bubble within the next 2 or 3 years if they play their cards right. The problem is that it just feels like each game they're shooting themselves in the foot. In this game, like giving up 140 rushing yards to the Patriots, one of the worst rushing football teams in the league, is not great. I do want to talk about the Patriots, though. Drake May, despite not having any weapons whatsoever, played a pretty solid game overall. Statistics maybe don't tell the full story, but I think that he's shown enough for the Patriots where you get him the right weapons around them that the Patriots can be competitive relatively soon in this rebuild. And I think he's shown that he's definitely a step up from Jacoby Brissett, but also the Patriots might have had their guy. They might have actually picked the right guy this time around.
Yeah, and that's good for the Patriots because, it was a lot of poverty without Tom Brady here. But, I guess they didn't want to go all in until they knew what they had with Drake May. But the fact that yeah, if the Patriots can go out here and get him some weapons, they could be competitive. Like for me, that's still a massive if, because you need to give your rookie wide receiver help here. We've seen case study one of Josh Allen get Stephon Diggs. Suddenly, Josh Allen is an elite quarterback, and he's been able to carry that momentum into this season and build that confidence. Matt Stafford gets Calvin Johnson. Suddenly, he's a Pro Bowl caliber quarterback. Jalen Hurts gets AJ Brown. Suddenly, his stock is flying all the way through the roof. And like the list just goes on with these young quarterbacks when they actually get an elite wide receiver here. So it's a massive if for New England. One, because Robert Kraft is cheap and he's a cheaper owner, and he has this won Super Bowls already. So like how much motivation does he have to get back there? And then two, you still can't draft any good wide receivers there. So unless something is going to change where it's a completely new regime, new scouts picking wide receivers, like I don't have any confidence for you to draft them. And, does anyone really want to go to New England there? Because now you have high taxes and terrible weather, not the best people in the world, roads designed for horses there. It's like you feel like you're in a mob movie when you step into a Dunkin' Donuts. You're like, what is happening in Boston? What a crazy place this is.
Yeah, you know what's funny is like I look at like their biggest additions. They had Jalen Polk and Javon Baker. I mean, already those guys are not panning out. Jalen Polk has 80 yards this season, and Javon Baker, I'll pull up his stats, but they clearly whiffed on their wide receivers yet again. Javon Baker doesn't have any catches actually this year, so their two rookies have not done anything. It looks like it's another bad draft for the Patriots as that list goes on for them. But again, like the Patriots, they got to figure out whether it's Jerod Mayo, who's the head coach moving forward. Are they going to finally change out of the defensive minded team that they've been the last 25 years and go modern? It's a big if. So Drake May has the potential to be really good. It's just whether or not the Patriots are going to hold him back, which I think that's going to be the big story with him moving forward. Is are the Patriots going to do enough to make him to elevate his talent?
Yeah, no. That is a big if, and there are many big ifs in the NFL. One of the biggest ifs in the NFL is if you look at the Dallas Cowboys, you had Michael McCarthy coming off the worst loss, some say, in NFL history. A lot of people were talking about what a bad loss it was to the seventh overall team, Green Bay Packers, and there is complete chaos in Dallas this week. Oh my god. So first of all, you have Mike McCarthy or Mike McCarthy. You have Micah Parsons basically saying on his podcast that Mike McCarthy is lazy and doesn't work hard. And we've had subtle quotes where he's like, yeah, maybe it's time to coach this team. It's like, it's time to do your job. Congratulations. You fucking woke up and realized you have millions of dollars in your bank account. Good for you. And then CeeDee Lamb is like, can we do something about the sun in the stadium because I missed a touchdown this game? And Jerry Jones was like, what do you want me to do? Tear the whole thing down? I mean, I feel like it gives us an advantage too. It's like, clearly not. Because your best receiver, all pro, arguably the best receiver in the league, not saying he is, but you can argue it, at least top five, is saying the fucking sun is, I lost a touchdown because of that. It's an actual problem now. And then his response is, what am I supposed to do? Tear down the whole stadium's like, yeah, maybe. Who thought that was a good idea? And you're saying it gives your team an advantage when literally it cost your team a touchdown. I don't understand. And Dallas, like, every week I'm like, okay, how could this blow up even worse? I'm not expecting them to win games, but now Micah Parsons saying that Mike McCarthy is lazy, Jerry Jones going back at his players now, and now CeeDee Lamb's like, okay, now is he going to get shipped out of Dallas because he crossed Jerry Jones and dare talk about the sun causing a problem? Like, it is just, you thought it was falling out before, but no, no, no. Dak Prescott getting hurt was just the start of it. That just opened Pandora's box for this team. And then I guess the bright spot is Trey Lance played in this game. Good for you. You finally went out there and played him in this game. You didn't want to play him. You wanted to play Cooper Rush, but end up putting Trey Lance in, and he goes 4 for 6, 21 yards. Had like two nice passes, I guess.
You know what's funny about the Cowboys is first of all the documents. We were right. Did we not say that the Cowboys were going to be bad this year? Now, granted, we couldn't have foreseen that Dak Prescott was going to be out for the season now, and that they were going to continue getting worse. But the Cowboys have now lost 4 straight games. They're going down the path of being one of the worst teams in the league this year. Because I honestly don't know if they are going to win another game this year at this point.
Lost to the
But
bye
yeah, I
week.
mean, the bye week. Yeah, maybe they can beat the bye week. You have CeeDee Lamb, who is a top 5 wide receiver in the league, who's complaining about your sunbeam, and your owner is counteracting that. The problem is every time they lose, or actually pretty much it's just every week, we have Jerry Jones opening his mouth and making the situation worse. It's like as if you have a house that's on fire and your owner is just dumping gasoline every week on that fire to make it continuously burn even harder. Whether it's him, whether it's Micah Parsons that's pissing him off, Micah Parsons, by the way, who is up for contract after this year. So maybe he's not even in Dallas after this year, potentially. It just keeps getting worse. I don't even want to talk about the team that actually played on the field at all, to be honest, because their offense, I mean, 49 passing yards. I mean, good Lord. And then, I mean, Rico Dowdle played a fine game, but your leading receiver was Jake Ferguson with 24 yards. Give me a break. Credit to the Eagles for doing what they're supposed to do against the Cowboys. They shut them down in this game, and Saquon had a good game here as well. But Cowboys, just each and every week, they just find a new way to embarrass themselves. They find a new way for Jerry Jones to put his foot in his mouth. And this team is just getting more and more toxic at this point. I don't know how this season ends without them just blowing up the entire team and rebuilding.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we can see how it not happening because of Jerry Jones, him being stuck in his ways. Until he steps away, I really don't think that anything is going to change for this team because it's been the same nonsense year after year after year. I mean, you never should have hired Mike McCarthy in the first place. And the fact that he's still there, your players are now openly calling him out on their podcast. Like, that's just crazy. And like, for the Eagles in this game, you went out there, you scored 34. Jalen Hurts barely broke 200 yards. Really, the only receiver that did anything was A.J. Brown. Jalen Hurts having 2 rushing touchdowns again, but it seemed like at least their defense got their mojo back in this game, albeit against the Cowboys. But this was the first game I looked at the Eagles, and it seemed like they had some real, at least swagger to them. Where like, okay, maybe this team's finally coming around again.
Yeah, I mean they're 7-2. They look like they might win the division at this point. So yeah, I like what I've seen from the Eagles the last month or so. Offensively, now that you have AJ Brown back and Saquon's playing how he's playing, this is a scary team. I mean, I think that if you're looking at the NFC, I feel like you have the Lions there, the Commanders there, and then the Eagles are in that same bubble for teams that will be competing for the Super Bowl.
Yeah, for sure. But it will be interesting to see how Thursday night football shakes out. That's really the real test. You go out there, and the thing is, you won 34-6, and that's exactly what you should versus the Dallas Cowboys, and then some. I mean, imagine being so bad you force the Eagles to play Kenny Pickett.
I know. I
Morgan
know, right?
Wallen himself stepping onto the field.
I honestly forget he's still in the league. I'm glad that he's just kind of holding the clipboard in Philly, but 1 for 2 for 5 yards. I'm like, yeah, that sounds about right for Kenny Pickett. But let's talk about the team that they're going to have to probably run into if they're going to make the Super Bowl. How about the Lions in this game? If I told you that Jared Goff was going to throw 5 interceptions, that they were going to be trailing for a good chunk of this game, they were down 23 to nothing, I believe, at one point, or at least 23-7, and they still found a way to win despite Jared Goff playing maybe his worst game, definitely of the season, but maybe of his entire career. Lions still find a way to win this game, which was just incredible. I feel like I should give you the floor in this case because I know like this game was just this solidifies that the Lions are making the Super Bowl in my mind.
Yeah, and it pissed me off after this game because I like mentioned like what a great win it was for the Lions, and someone's like, "Oh, the Lions suck. They had 5 interceptions." I'm like, "No, that's the reason why the Lions are good because they just played the worst possible game on offense that they could play this year." And then Jared Goff throws 5 interceptions. Looks like there was an issue going on with his wrist, but the ball was coming out a little bit weird. One of those interceptions, it was just a punt at the end of the half. Like, really, he was just trying to take a shot to the end zone. But this is a team that people are finally catching on to Dan Campbell being one of the better coaches in the league. They're finally buying into the motto of grit. And this was one of those wins for the Detroit Lions that's going to give you the utmost confidence. And now they're going to feel like they can win every single game because the reason why the Lions are a great team after this game is because like it doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to, be the prettiest game. Jared Goff may have a game where he has 5 turnovers, but we came back against the team that's probably going to be their division and won. And it just brings you back to Dan Campbell. He's like, we're going to tread water long enough to bury you in Hard Knocks. One of the most iconic quotes of all time. We're going to tread water long enough just to bury you. You're going to knock us down. We're going to get up and bite another kneecap. And the thing is, with previous Lions teams, this wouldn't be possible to happen because the offense had to do pretty much everything. It's insane to me that Aiden Hutchinson goes down. You fall down 23-7 in this game, and your defense was the star of the show. Outside of the hometown kid coming home, kicking 2 field goals to ice the game, your running backs, they played pretty decent, but were held down most of the game. I mean, your defense was flying all over the field. You finally have a legitimate secondary in this game. They did enough and they shut them out in the second half. I mean, they pitched a shutout, which is the craziest thing because people were calling for Aaron Glenn's job. Aiden Hutchinson isn't there, but Aleem McNeil has been a monster for them. Jack Campbell, they were highlighting about how much better he's been this year, especially in coverage. I mean, some of the plays he had against Dalton Schultz were absolutely electric there. Alexander Lonzy being the Energizer Bunny, but you lost your best player on defense, and you still pitched a shutout against a potential playoff team in the AFC. I mean, this team is beyond impressive. They've taken a step further than I thought they could possibly take, and I predicted them to go to the Super Bowl this year. I mean, it's absolutely electric that they won this game.
And I think the thing that I really love about the Lions is each year they've had building blocks and they've continuously got better. Whether it was them running the table when they were 1-7, ended up being 9-8, or whether it was last year being 12-5. This year, this seems like a team of destiny. I mean, last year their defense wasn't spectacular. Their offense was the real magnet, but at this point, they're winning games, whether it's shutting them down defensively, whether it's them putting up 40 points. Jared Goff, again, has one of the worst games of this season. This team feels like a 2004 Red Sox or a 2016 Cubs, where it just feels like it's a team of destiny. And I'm not here to jinx them because I want to see the Lions succeed. I think this Lions team is bound for the Super Bowl simply because it's not often that you have all 53 players buy into one coach like this. You really only see it with a team like the Chiefs or maybe the Patriots, but everybody is in for the common good. The city of Detroit is buying into this. Pretty much, I think at this point, they've become America's team, for Christ's sakes. Everyone loves the Lions. And I feel like this is a team that is going to run the table. Maybe they go 15-2. I think they're definitely bound for that one seed because, again, this is the worst game that they're going to play. And they put up 26. They shut out the Texans in the second half. And this is a good Texans team. This is a team that is definitely in the mix that could win a playoff game even with their injuries. This is still a very good Texans team, even with how they played recently. I mean, at this point, I can't see the Lions losing another game at this point.
Yeah, this is one of those games that solidifies them completely as a contender here to stay over the next few years because this was the fun team that people are like, oh, who's going to fall off this year? The Lions, like, oh, well, clearly you don't pay attention to football. Like, it's literally your job to look at football and analyze teams. And the fact that you've missed what Dan Campbell and the Lions have done and everything has been spectacular here and like, oh, well, he had two bad calls in the San Francisco 49ers game in the conference championship. Like, yeah, they weren't supposed to be in that game. They just missed the playoffs the year before, started out 1-7, and they were going to be happy if they made it to the playoffs and won a game. Oh, wait, you all picked the Rams to beat them. They go out there and beat the Rams, and then, okay, yeah, we know where they're going to beat the Bucks, and then you all pick the 49ers to beat them. Like, that was a game they weren't supposed to be leading in. They weren't supposed to be there. They're ahead of schedule, still early. This was the year that they were supposed to take the next step, and they are. Then they didn't even just take a next step. They leaped over a mountain and a hill, and people still were trying to write them off at the beginning of the year. But you're still trying to sell us teams like the Dallas Cowboys. You're still trying to shove Dak Prescott down our throat. Like, no, this is going to be one of the teams to beat in the NFC, and they look like clearly the front runner to get to the Super Bowl. Right now, we're looking at a Ravens and Lions Super Bowl, like, which would be absolutely amazing. And I think it'd be a high scoring matchup, especially with how the Ravens secondary has played there. But like the fact that this was the team that people were picking to write off, it's like, okay. He's like, it's another reason why you're also picking the Jets to be in the Super Bowl bubble. Like, how do you have any credibility left in certain mainstream, NFL media?
I think if I had a crystal ball to dictate what the rest of the season is going to look like, this is what I would have. I see a scenario where the Lions make the Super Bowl, they face the Chiefs, and they beat the Chiefs, which would then form a very interesting anomaly here where Jared Goff is essentially the Eli Manning to Patrick Mahomes. Think about it. He's faced him twice before. He had that historic Mexico game where he beats him. He obviously beat him week one last year. And then if he can go to the Super Bowl, face Patrick Mahomes, beat Patrick Mahomes, and avoid Patrick Mahomes having a three-peat and potentially a Chiefs team that could be undefeated at that point, tell me that that wouldn't set up one of the greatest NFL seasons of all time. The Lions win, which they deserve to do. Jared Goff becomes the Eli Manning of this generation, although significantly better. And also, he prevents Patrick Mahomes from becoming pretty much the GOAT at that. I think if Patrick Mahomes wins three straight, the GOAT conversation becomes a lot more serious at that point. And if he can negate that, then that's the narrative that I'm going to put into the universe now so that when I'm right in 4 months, I can say that I said it early.
Yeah, you can say that you said it early. It's almost like if I had a crystal ball, I would pick my co-host Super Bowl prediction. That's what I would do.
No,
Yeah,
receipts. No, you picked the Lions. I'll
receipts.
give you credit.
Yeah, I picked the Lions and I picked the Chiefs Super Bowl, and I picked the Lions to win exactly for that. But yeah, I like where your head's at. Jared Goff being the Eli Manning, like to Patrick Mahomes, like he kind of has been that so far for him. It's
Yeah, and
weird
it's,
because like Brady never
especially
really had that in the AFC outside of like maybe Joe Flacco was kind of one of those fluky quarterbacks who would always play well against him.
yeah, I think that yeah, for Mahomes, I feel like it's been Jared Goff. Not that Jared Goff is a bad quarterback. I mean, he's been a Pro Bowler. He's already made it to a Super Bowl. But I think that that's what that narrative would become. Plus, this Detroit Lions team that we think about the Hard Knocks team, we think about Dan Campbell, the goofiness there. That's the narrative that I want to see. I want to see the Lions win the Super Bowl. I think that they're due to win at least the Super Bowl in the next year or two. I just think that they just have so much positive energy there that it would be a shame for them not to win a Super Bowl.
Yeah, no, that would be depressing if the Lions never won a Super Bowl. But hey, I think they're gonna do it this year. I think they're gonna get it done. Another team we were high on was the team that they played was the Texans. We talked about the Lions a lot because the Lions deserve their credit. We were the earliest, we literally launched our show the year that Dan Campbell was hired there. We were talking about him, how much we love this team, how much he was the coach for the job when people were like, oh, who's this retarded meathead who's going to be their head coach? And now look at them. Like, maybe don't judge a book by its cover. But on the flip side, the Texans now, you get shut out in the second half. They've had issues scoring in the second half and making adjustments. Are they just dead now? Like ever since like the kind of meme now going around is ever since that CJ Stroud tried to son Caleb Williams, he's just fallen off a cliff this season. Like ever since that moment on Sunday Night Football.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on with them. I know obviously losing Nico Collins and Stephon Diggs didn't do him any favors, but I mean, pretty much since that Bears game, he's been all but mediocre. I mean, he had that one good game against the Patriots and Jags, but otherwise, I mean, Buffalo, not very impressive. And then the last 2 weeks, he's been all but bad ultimately. I mean, one touchdown, two picks for the Lions, and no touchdowns at all against the Jets, 8 sacks. Like, I don't know. I feel like definitely having some sophomore slumps. I still think he's a great quarterback, and I definitely think that wouldn't worry too much. I think the injuries have definitely made it a lot worse for them, but moving forward, I mean, they have 3 easy games coming up. If they don't win all 3 of those games, then cause to pause, especially if they lose to the Cowboys. If they lose to the Cowboys, I'm going to be very worried. They face them on Monday Night Football. At that point, I'll be really worried. But I think they should be fine. Injuries come when the injuries are healed. I think they'll be fine overall, but definitely not been playing great.
Yeah, their defense has been fine. That my only problem with their defense is they're giving up every clutch drive so far to good teams this year, like to the Packers, and they gave up the drive to the Lions to get the football at the end. But Jared Goff has just been doing this. He's been bringing his team back, showing up in the clutch, even with 5 turnovers. We get that. But the thing that worries me, though, is your offense has looked good, but it's looked terrible in the second half, and they haven't been able to make too many adjustments with the offense where it's shining in the second half, and that's been a real problem for them. Has just been scoring in the fourth quarter, opening up the playbook again in the third quarter here. Like maybe that's teams kind of figuring out, okay, they really don't have much going on right now besides Joe Mixon and Tank Dell. But at the same point, like you have a loss that was in the bag in this game. You're dominating the first half. You had to run away this game, and CJ Stroud, like it was his fault that they lost the game because you missed a wide open wide receiver. If you had just looked over there, and then the fact that you throw the ball 2 seconds, it turns over in the end zone to the Lions, and that basically shifts the entire momentum all the way back to Detroit. So not only did you miss out on a touchdown that would have blown the game wide open, you gave all the momentum to the other team, and you really didn't come out firing after that. You're kind of timid after you threw that pick.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think after that interception, he just didn't do enough to get the game going. Lions, they shut down Joe Mixon, and I feel like he's kind of been the lifeblood of that offense where if he doesn't get over 100 yards, the Texans have been all but screwed. So I think for CJ, I still think he's good, but I definitely think that he's going through some growing pains. And I think D'Amico Ryans as a head coach is also going through growing pains. He didn't have all that much experience. He's still a fairly young head coach. So I think that definitely not their year this year. I think that they might be a first round exit at the rate that they're going, especially with the injuries that have piled up for them.
Yeah, no. Joe Mixon being the lifeblood of your of your offense, like that's just a problem for me. Like this isn't like the 2000s where you can have a kick-ass defense and Joe Mixon and Nico Collins and that's going to be enough to get it done in the playoffs. Like look at how much the Ravens are stacking up. Look at how stacked the Rams were when they won the Super Bowl. Like the Chiefs and the Patriots are the exception, but their defenses are absolutely loaded and they're at least top 3 every year that they win the Super Bowl. So yeah, I just don't think that they're gonna get it done. Hopefully they can turn it around with Nico Collins, but we shall see with Houston.
We shall see. We have two more games to cover here, both in the AFC East. Let's get the Bills game out of the way here. We got the Bills. They beat the Colts 30-20. Got it done on the ground. James Cook had 80 yards and a touchdown. Josh Allen, 3 weeks in a row now with an interception after not having an interception the first 8 weeks of the season. Um, does this change your sentiment at all about the Bills? Does this continue your mentality with the Colts? And Josh Allen, turnovers coming back around for him. Are you concerned at all about the Bills and Josh Allen if he's starting to go back to his old ways?
I mean, yeah, and I always knew he was gonna revert back to this and kind of go back to his old ways. Cause like just his style of football, like he's bound to have some turnovers. And it wasn't for lack of trying with interceptions. Like you look at that Texans game at the end of it, you could count 3 picks that the Texans could have potentially had just in that last drive here. So with the Bills, for me, it's like as long as Sean McDermott is the head coach there, I really don't see you getting to a Super Bowl, getting past the Kansas City Chiefs or a team like the Ravens. I just think currently in the AFC right now, you're outgunned. And I think it gives you an advantage because no one really expects you to get to and win the Super Bowl this year. And they've stopped putting you, well, some people put him in the same category as Patrick Mahomes, but they're not putting you as the equal to the Kansas City Chiefs anymore. So maybe that gives you an advantage. But my opinion on them was you probably get to the divisional round and lose this year. And that's still my opinion on them after this game. And the Colts, just just a disappointment this season. Like you have pretty much the same team. You have players, like Michael Pittman, Alec Pierce on your team that have played well. Josh Downs and Jonathan Taylor has played pretty productive this season for a running back who just got paid. Like typically we don't see guys go out there, get paid, and then play as well as he has. And then it seems like your defense has been better than it has at least the past few years, even though the Bills have put up 30 points, but it's just a disappointing situation right now for the Colts. And it seems like they've lost a little bit of their mojo here. I don't know if that's completely on Shane Steichen, but it just feels like there's a hole in this Colts team where they just don't have the juice there. Something's missing.
Yeah, I feel the same. The Colts are definitely one of those teams. I think they can still compete for the playoffs, but they need to turn things around. I think the switch from from Anthony Richardson to Joe Flacco, I feel like that might have divided the locker room a little bit. A lot of people were very unhappy when they made the switch. I understand it personally, but whether or not it's Joe Flacco, I know Joe Flacco had 3 picks in this game, or maybe it's just their defense not playing up to their capability, but I just think that this is a Colts team that has underperformed this season for one reason or another. The games that they've lost, I mean, they did lose to the Bills, Vikings, and Texans all in a row, which I guess is understandable, but let's see how they perform against the Jets next week. And that will be my real. I think if they lose that game, they're pretty much out of the playoffs. But I still a little disappointed with what I've seen from the Colts to this point, and hoping that they can shake it before the end of the playoffs.
Yeah, for sure.
And then last game of the week was Monday Night Football. We alluded to it a little bit earlier, but Dolphins beat the Rams on Monday Night Football. Uh, does this give you any optimism for the Dolphins and their playoff push now that Tua's back? Or does this hurt at all the Rams? Do you think the Rams can still run the table and make the playoffs? Any sentiment changed on this game after Monday Night Football?
Yeah, I mean, you can make a playoff push if you're the Miami Dolphins, but I felt like you just got too far behind. And it's kind of like if you go into a convenience store, you take something and get charged for it when you're there on camera, and then they're like, sure, you can go to court, you can try and fight it here, but are you going to win when we have video evidence of you stealing? No, probably not. And that's kind of my sentiment on the Miami Dolphins, where you were just abysmal without Tua. And now that he's back, sure, you go out there, you beat the Rams. It was kind of a divided home game there, but I just can't wrap my arms around you getting to the playoffs when the Chargers are 6-3. You're going to have to compete against the Bengals, who have a fairly easy schedule to get there. You already played the Bills twice, so you may not have too many tough games, but like, I just can't see this team getting to and making the playoffs. And I think it'd be a travesty if the Miami Dolphins did make the playoffs. Like, we've seen this before and no one wants to see it. Oh, yeah. High flying offense in the regular season that can't do anything in the playoffs. I mean, Tua like had some good moments in this game, but it was mostly Tyreek Hill. Like, he can get the ball to Tyreek Hill better than Skylar Thompson and Brett Huntley, but how much better than like some of the other quarterbacks in the NFL? Like, not too much, and he's not worth $60 million. So I just don't think this Miami team is one that people should be wrapping their arms around, that they're going to suddenly get geared up and make the playoffs after, going 2-7 now. Now you're 3-7 trying to make a push for the playoffs. Like, I just think you're too far behind.
I agree. I think they're too far behind. I also think that Tyreek hasn't been himself this much this year. I think a lot of that could go to the quarterback play, but this team just feels like they're lost. For the Rams, my biggest takeaway from this Rams game, I still think the Rams are definitely capable of making the playoffs. I don't think this derails them, especially with the current state of the NFC West. But my biggest gripe is Sean McVay, go for it when you're that close to the red zone. Like, you were down 23-12. You needed points, and instead of going for it, you kick 5 field goals. You're in the red zone 5 times. You kick it 5 times, and I feel like if you went for it on some of these plays, that's the difference between you losing and winning. And I just felt like super conservative overall. I think that overall, like offensively, they moved the ball relatively well. We had a big game from Puka Nakua. Kyron Williams was fine in this game. Stafford played a pretty decent game overall, but for me, it was some of the decisions that Sean McVay made. And I'm usually not one to question Sean McVay because obviously he's a great head coach, but go for it. You're that close to the red zone. What are you doing kicking field goals? That's just continuously keeping you in that same position that you were in, trailing in this game. I didn't love some of the play calls from Sean McVay. I think they could have easily scored over 20 points in this game had they have gone for it in certain situations.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the thing with this Rams team is Nakoa and Cooper Cup both played well in this game. It's like 98 and 80 yards. Like, that's pretty much what you're going to get from them. They'll probably get better over the next few weeks as they get reintegrated to the offense. But like, I've never been a huge believer in Kyron Williams. Like, I've never been like clamoring like, oh my god, Kyron Williams. Like, I know he had the touchdown streak, but at the end of the day, like, I was like, people talk about Kyle Williams and like he's an elite running back in the league. I just don't see him like ever having a season like Josh Jacobs had that one year in with the Raiders. And Josh Jacobs has still had some severely productive games here, specifically in Jacksonville, where he carried them to a win when Malik Willis went down. I don't see him in the same level as like Todd Gurley was for this team, like a Derrick Henry here, putting him on that level. Like, I just don't see him being that elite running back who's going to help them take them to the next level. So I think he's like a really good number one, but he's more in like the James Conner tier, where James Conner has had some really good seasons, but is he, like a Derrick Henry and a Jonathan Taylor? It's like he'll have a really good year, but mostly he's kind of in that number 14 or 15 spot, and that's okay. But they just haven't had that Sean McVay signature running game that I felt like was what made the Rams super successful, not Matthew Stafford throwing the ball 46.
Yeah, I get what you mean. I think I personally really like Kyron Williams, but I do agree that I don't think he's like the Jonathan Taylors of the world. I think he's closer to like a Kenneth Walker even. I think Kenneth Walker may be a touch better, but Kyron Williams definitely not in that same echelons. I'd love to see them get another person like a big physical running back, kind of similar to what the Lions had when they had Jamal Williams and DeAndre Swift. I'd like to see them get a big physical back that could complement Kyron Williams' game, but just don't think they're quite there yet. But yeah, I know what you mean. I think the Rams, they're still fine overall, but this game didn't love some of the play calls from Sean McVay, and I think that they're in a bad spot after this game.
Yeah, and maybe they're going for a high draft pick or trying to move on from Stafford next year, but we'll see. Sean McVay, though, still Super Bowl winning head coach, but I do get what you mean. He should have gone for it, especially like 5 field goals when you're playing the Dolphins. Like your season kind of is on the line here. Where it's like if you drop another game here, it's like it's going to be a lot harder to climb back to the top of your division where you play the 49ers and the Cardinals again, so you have those games circled on your calendar. But at some point, you got to pick up the pace a little bit on offense here. And it seems like the offensive line has been just you can't break 23 points. Like you definitely should be scoring at least 24 to 27 every single game.
Yeah, with the talent that they have, I agree. Disappointing, but let's see. Next week they face the Patriots at 1 o'clock, so I think that they should be able to get back to winning ways. And then their schedule, for the most part, is relatively easy moving forward. They have a couple of tough games in there, but they should be able to at least be in the mix when it comes time for Week 18.
I would hope so.
I would hope so too. But here we recapped every game that went down in Week 10 in the NFL. We've talked about some of the big signings as well, top news. But one thing that we are forgetting to do, which we are covering right now here, before we go into week 11, it's time that we talk about the worst of the worst, the bottom of the barrel, abysmal, absolutely terrible. Worst top five according to the Brickyard. We're going to first talk about the teams that will not be included on this list because it's important that they've graduated from this list at least for 1 week. The Patriots and Panthers. You win, you're off the list as far as I'm concerned. Bryce Young playing relatively well. Okay, we'll take that. And then for the Patriots, looks like they might have found their guy with Drake May getting a win against the Bears. Patriots and Panthers, a team that are historically stapled to the worst top five. You're free from this list, at least for this week. Let's start at number 5, though. A team that lost to the bye week, a team that I didn't forget also sucks, a team that has a horrible running game. Head coach, we wonder about. Aiden O'Connell, Gardner Minshew, we don't love that. That's right. I have the Raiders at the worst top 5. They are still one of the worst teams, losing to the bye week. I mean, how does Alexander Mattson have 0 yards against the bye week? That's just pathetic. I put the Raiders at number 5. I didn't forget you just because you didn't play this week. At number 4, I have the Jacksonville Jaguars, but more importantly, the 2021 QB class. Good God, is this one of the worst classes in NFL history? Mac Jones with the most Mac Jones stat line, 100 yards, 2 picks. Give me a break. We also saw Trey Lance, who stepped into the game and immediately wet his pants in this game. This is mainly a part of the Jags, who offensively is completely anemic. Their defense is anemic, and they've just been completely disappointing since the Doug Peterson era began. And Trevor Lawrence wasn't even there to bear witness to it. Jags at number 4. They are the number 4 worst team. Now we get into the meat and potatoes of the worst of the worst. And let's start with two teams that I have both at number three because they are both two sides of the same coin. Two franchises who have been pathetic their entire life at the quarterback position. One team did it right, the other team did it wrong. One team drafted the number one overall pick and made the right moves and got the talent around him, and they've been disappointing. The other team thought they were just one quarterback away from the Super Bowl, and they traded for the 41-year-old Aaron Rodgers. Two teams who have been historically pathetic at the quarterback position and are still pathetic at the quarterback position. That's right. The Chicago Bears and the New York Jets are there at number three. The Bears have gone 23 consecutive drives without a touchdown. Caleb Williams has not scored a touchdown in America since October. And for the Jets, they just find new ways to disappoint me. Aaron Rodgers, you're talking about a guy who is 41 years old, who has been flirting with retirement for the last 3, 4 years. And who would have thought that the Jets would just crumble and fail? Oh, I know. We did. Two teams that, although one has more optimism than the other, both teams find new ways to embarrass their fan base. Therefore, I have both of them at the number three spot. And then at number two, I have the New York Giants. Of course. Why would they not be here? Because we have not gotten news that Daniel Jones has been benched, he will continue to be here. He has the longest consecutive game streak without 3+ touchdowns, with 57 consecutive games without 3+ touchdowns. The next closest is Deshaun Watson with 14. Daniel Jones has been, at this point, he should be in prison for what he has done to the city of New York. This is a guy who genuinely hates New York and does not care about the city of New York whatsoever. But even I say enough is enough. $140 million, 6 years of lackluster play where you're winning 30% of your games, completely pathetic. Hasn't scored a touchdown at home in 2 years. What are we doing here, New York? Bench him, put in Drew Lock, put in Tommy DeVito, and maybe then you won't be in the worst top five. But at number one, this is a team that I feel like will continuously be on this worst top five this week because each and every week, not only is there a new loss on their record, but there's a new headline. Whether it's CeeDee Lamb complaining about the Sunbeams, whether it's Micah Parsons complaining about Mike McCarthy being lazy, the list goes on. Dak Prescott out for the season. The Dallas Cowboys are the worst team in the NFL. You have the biggest brand in sports, and yet for the last 25 years, you've been 8-8 or worse. Last year, you were the king of the world at 12-5, and you immediately wet your pants against the Packers in the wild card round. And then this season has been nothing but loss after loss, headline after headline. The Dallas Cowboys, for the foreseeable future, will be one of the worst teams according to the Brickyard. And this week, they are the number one worst team according to the Brickyard entering week 11.
And it's crazy because you put them on the worst top five before it was cool to call the Cowboys a bad team here. And it was, I think it was after they lost to the Ravens or there was another game earlier in the season, but they made an early appearance here. People thought it was crazy. And now how the tables have turned on the Dallas Cowboys, where I thought this was a team coming into the season. I'm like, hey, you gave them a very generous schedule preview, and I commend you for being a man of love. But I'm like, I see 6 wins, and it might not even be that. And I feel like I'm one of the most realistic people when it comes to judging the Cowboys here. Been pretty spot on with them the past few years here. And now you might not even win 6 games. That's crazy to me. And that's an epic failure. And it comes down to, maybe don't bring back your coach who is, incompetent, to say the least, to put it nicely.
Yeah. And not only that, like this team, even though Dak Prescott's out, I feel like this team still has enough talent to be at least winning games. And the way that they're losing their games as well, like the Eagles, your divisional opponent, you put up 6 points. And I understand that it's your backup quarterbacks to whatnot, but this team is bad defensively. They're not good at running the football. Their quarterback position is an epic fail as well. Their offensive line is getting worse. There's not a single thing that this team does that's good at this point. The Cowboys are just bad at everything at this point, and it's going to continue to get ugly for them. Jerry Jones continuously making a fool of himself.
Yeah, no, continuing to make a fool of himself. But we recap the entire NFL season. Tune in tomorrow. We're going to be previewing every single team, going over the top 5 teams heading into week 11. Absolutely crazy. Just had an 11-11 this week. And then probably going to go over a little bit with the Grammys. We have John Jones fighting this weekend. We have Mike Tyson and Jake Paul. Are you going to get a free Netflix trial just to watch that? Let us know down below, but we have a hell of a show coming for you tomorrow. Same place, and most importantly, stay brick.
Day brick.